What's exciting about this platform for me is being able to deal with a client on the other side of the world.
Really good for educational purposes, for schools, for group projects.
We could use the platform to train new people, particularly those who are newer to editing.
Being able to communicate with your editor if you're a director, or for multiple editors to be able to work together.
And that is kind of mind-blowing, actually.
Good afternoon, everybody in England and to the east, and good morning to our viewers who are coming in from North America. This is the second of our podcasts from the Elevate series. My name's Sumit. I'm the CPO for Blackbird, the developers of Elevate IO. Today is going to be an exciting show. We're going to be looking at essentially the move to cloud editing and content management. And I'm going to be joined by two guests. The first of our guests is actually the product manager for the traditional Blackbird video editing product, which is used extensively in the M&E industry. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Hugh Dymond to the show. Hey, Hugh.
Thanks very much, Sumit. Good to be here.
Excellent. Now, Hugh, you've obviously, tell us a little bit about your past before you got to Blackbird.
Yeah, of course. So I was actually fortunate enough way back in much younger days, university, doing a broadcast technology degree, which encompassed an awful lot of things covering kind of video and audio encoding and decoding and a lot of the underlying tech for video, as well as a bit of dabbling into the production side, both from live production and editing and post. So it was a really interesting kind of background, and came through a number of different roles in the broadcast sector, right from the glamorous world of shopping TV operations through to tapeless migration projects and broadcasting. And then ultimately I joined Blackbird just over 6 years ago, actually. So, I mean, since I joined, obviously Blackbird became Blackbird as a company and as a product. And we've had a really interesting number of years getting the product acknowledged and used at some of the some of the peak areas of the media and entertainment industry, really. So it's been a very exciting ride, and we're obviously now collaborating a lot on some of the initiatives we're talking about today.
Definitely. Now, I hope I don't want to embarrass you too much, but I do actually have a photo of you, which circulated a few days ago around the company. This is you when you were at university, working on a project with BBC Wales, I believe.
That's right. Yeah. I worked over there for about 18 months, actually, with a good friend who was just texting me a couple of hours ago. He's just had a baby. Very good friend of mine. So that I would say that haircut was probably half of a month's salary back at that time. But I mean that was really interesting. That was using, I think it was Final Cut 4 back at the time, with DV cam decks slaved through FireWire and connected into the back of a Mac, and it was sort of an illusion into file-based workflows. But it was a really interesting time because obviously the power of the desktop application was really increasing drastically at the time. And whilst there was a fairly cumbersome kind of ingest flow, a lot of the mechanics of editing and creating content are still things that we're familiar with in what you might call a modern non-linear editing application. So back then it was really learning some of the fundamentals that haven't really changed an awful lot since, which is quite an interesting thing in itself.
That's true. I mean, that's what's one of the interesting things, is that in the last 20 years, we've seen a massive evolution in how you can shoot content. We've gone from sort of shoulder mount cameras that could shoot only in SD to 4K flying drones, probably that started really about 10 years ago. And then even today, Blackmagic announced a new camera that they're working on with Apple for the Vision Pro, which is kind of really interesting. It's sort of a little bit of a throwback to the whole 3D space. But we've seen the content creation space, or from the acquisition of video, change quite drastically, moving away from tape to file-based, everything miniaturizing, and the quality just exploding. 8K is now quite common in cameras. And we've obviously seen distribution go the same way. Again, 20 years ago, you had tape, as in VHS, you had DVD, and you had essentially television, and that was pretty much it. And now the number of distribution options are just numerous, from YouTube to Vimeo to Insta to TikTok, etc. And of course, pretty much all television now is broadcast over IP. But what's strange is that the video editing industry has sort of been pretty much the same, just getting better and better and better, but it is just still the same principle. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think there's, it was certainly what I've observed, and one of the reasons I originally joined Blackbird back in 2018 was really, I could see there was opportunity for getting easier and faster access to content, which is definitely an untapped resource. The complications and all the delays in getting access to live content in particular. We've had a lot of success on the Blackbird product itself in areas of sports and news, where the faster you can gain access to the footage, the better, ultimately, because you're trying to beat a competitor to market and come up with some content that's unique, whether it's for distribution to YouTube or X or any of the other platforms, or indeed back into a broadcast chain. The faster you can create the footage, the better, which kind of means you've got to get access to it in a more seamless way faster. And that underlying technology and the speed and fluidity of access really, that underpins a lot of some of the core tech that we have within the business that we're also starting to see emerge through the Elevate platform as well. I mean, just to give you an example, we're obviously ramping up now with a large sporting event, which shall remain on. It's going to be in France, but that'll be starting at the end of July. And speed of access to that high quality, high grade footage is absolutely paramount for rights holders to be able to rapidly create content without having to go through that cumbersome process of localizing it, downloading it, copying it around, sharing it with others within the same network. The core principles that I originally joined for in 2018 are really now starting to gain some momentum, which is really exciting to see.
Definitely. Now, one thing that also sort of the project that we're doing this summer has really helped elevate, because for those of you who don't know the companies that well, but Blackbird is obviously our main company and our main incumbent product, which is used a lot in media and entertainment. And Elevate is the new platform that we're developing and that we're rolling out. One of the things is that they both share the common core technology. So things that are developed for M&E make their way into Elevate and vice versa. And there's something that obviously was needed for this summer's games. So do you want to tell us a little bit about the LUTs project?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So, lookup tables or LUTs, as they're known as, they're a feature of video processing, baked into pretty much all editing applications and a lot of conversion applications. Basically, it's a way of applying a particular color profile, whether it be to adopt a particular standard. So you're going from a Sony log format to a Rec 709 or similar, but also for applying a look or a style to content, a particular type of color profile which might make it look particularly appealable for whatever reason. The Matrix is a great example. Obviously, that's in the feature film world, but that particular style, I think you could look at almost any shot of the movie and you would know exactly what movie it's from. It's very distinctive, and what you can get from a style LUT is really that feel of a cohesive profile that goes across your content. So for creativity, it's really exciting. So we actually have implemented LUTs in both the core technology and also into the Blackbird product. And actually, we released it to our production customers just a couple of days ago. It was Tuesday this week. So, we're seeing this drive for innovation and features, interestingly, feeding both the growth of the feature set on the Blackbird platform, the core technology as well, which is growing and evolving. But as you say, it's laying the groundwork in this particular instance for that feature to now be implemented into the Elevate platform. So, it's really, really exciting to see the reuse potential, both from a sort of enterprise and broadcast perspective, but also on Elevate itself, as content creation demands are going to increase more and more.
Definitely, and I think that's what's exciting, is that this industry doesn't stand still, and obviously we're going to be innovating as we build out Elevate. We're still going to be innovating in the M&E space, and we're still going to be pioneering some of the technologies which are probably more applicable to the high end to start with, but then finding out, once we built them, a really easy way to implement them and make them available to a much wider audience. Because again, for those of you who do not know, the difference between our products is our M&E product is obviously focused on the higher end users, and as a result it has a much smaller user group but a much bigger distribution. But then the whole point behind Elevate is essentially to bring video editing to a much wider user base, and therefore it has to be, some of these high end tricks and technologies have to be implemented in a slightly different way. So we definitely are looking forward to implementing that into Elevate. So moving on, my second guest who will be joining us is somebody that I've worked with since 2008. We both worked on the Apple Live Events project. It's what's often been referred to as a full stack videographer. So this is a guy who can shoot, he can edit, he can do motion graphics. And just before we bring him on the show, I'd like to share his show reel, just so you get a flavor of the work that he's responsible for.
There must be some kind of way out of here. Said a joker to the thief. There's too much confusion. I can't get no relief. Mr. Standard, the train found mine. Found mine, take my earth. Learn whatever on the mind. Nobody under this world.
Welcome, Jake, to the show.
Hi, Sumit. Thanks for having me along.
Excellent. So as I mentioned before, we've worked together for a long time, and you've worked with numerous clients in many different disguises. So do you want to tell us a little bit about your where you started and how you got into the video production industry?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I started actually originally in audio after university. So I went into kind of radio production and sort of soundtrack producing. And then from there, I went kind of pretty quickly sideways into production, into video production, into TV. So I worked on quite a few, let's say, relatively low-cost TV shows, but across a variety of subjects. I did a long travel series, which was great because I ended up everywhere in the world, and but lugging some very heavy kit around with me at the same time, being small crews. It was me in the kit around, but it gave me great experience, and just as he was saying earlier, actually, about the fact that he got a taste of all these different elements of production when he was starting out. It's the same for me. I was I was producing and then started shooting, and then naturally they kind of went into editing, and I've kind of remained editing and shooting for ever since, and then that kind of went into directing as well. So and then graphics as well came a bit later as well. So I mean, I did TV for quite a while, and then moved into the corporate world and brand and advertising, which is a completely different ball game in the sense of how things work on all different levels. But the main thing is actually there's a lot more quick turnaround, and it's a lot more disparate types of things that happen. So pretty much anything can be thrown at you, and one of the things is that corporate is way beyond corporate video, let's say. I mean, the demands now of brands is as wide as media is itself. So you get to have a bit of everything, and you get to experience a bit of everything in terms of production. So, over the last few years, I worked with a load of great people, obviously with you, with Apple, and then that continued for quite a long time with Apple, with their Pro apps, and across with Adobe, and I do a lot of work with Expedia as well. So a lot of big tech companies, but again, over into kind of every subject you can think of as well. I work with business schools and with fashion houses and with some of the big agencies here in London. We did a big project with Saatchi & Saatchi, and so it's a real mix of where the next job's going to come from, actually. So that's one of the reasons it's exciting. And along comes with that is the challenge of production, and how do you tailor your production to all these different needs and different locations and different people and different subject matter. So that's all pretty exciting.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've obviously seen a lot of your work over the years, and you've always been up to different things, and every shoot's different. That's the nature of production. And of course, the kit has evolved, and the tools that you use have evolved massively. And obviously, when we spoke the other day before this podcast, we both reminisced over starting our video editing journeys with Media 100, which was, for those of you who don't know, one of the very first actually online quality tools that was non-linear editing tools that was around. And you've obviously progressed all the way through since to where we are today, and now being one of the people that we've used during the focus groups, and even long before the focus groups, we obviously spoke with you right at the beginning of the Elevate project to help us design the tool that would be great for people who are in your shoes. One of the things that we talked about earlier with Hugh was how production has sort of changed from the acquisition perspective a huge amount. The distribution's changed, but obviously the editing process hasn't changed significantly in terms of the actual underlying tools. But some of the work around, or some of the tools that have cropped up, like file sharing tools, have obviously helped make video a little bit more collaborative. But one of the things we talked about was the pain that you used to go through historically in sort of converting files and working from tape. And what is it that you feel that now today it helps you in the production process?
Yeah, I mean, as you say, the tech, of course, is changing. It's a very tech-heavy industry, and so there's a constant sort of rolling of new tech, and the majority of it is kind of refining of what's gone on before, and just refining a process. And as you say, we started linear tape. I mean, before Media 100 and briefly, and that was a complete sea change when we went to online. But ever since, it's been it's been a kind of an iterative process of more speed, more compute power, more storage power, and so on. And so those kind of things are, of course, super important in the business, because as quality increases and as expectations increase and everything else, and the kit's got to keep up, but at the same time, as kit improves, then those things become better as well. But there are bottlenecks, and there have always been bottlenecks, and it's been a history of like, how do you overcome the bottleneck? I think it's literally the history of the bottleneck. And so what's amazing to see, I remember having a conversation actually with a friend of mine who's a photographer, and this was years and years ago, and we were still shooting on tape, and he was just clicking away merrily onto a memory card. And I said, oh, look, you know what? I think that the best camera will be something that could record onto something like a memory, onto a memory stick or something. It'd be amazing to have that with video. And little did I know, I had a suspicion it might come along. But I remember having that conversation, and I was, oh yeah, God, I can't believe you shoot on tape. That's crazy. But that is one of those huge things that happened, was that suddenly everything just went across to memory, to cards and things. So that's, it's things like that which, of course, revolutionize certain bits of production. But it's kind of still approximately the same process, in the sense that you have to film something, and then you physically got something physical out of that. If that's a memory card, then that's your equivalent of the tape or whatever. And then you've got to do something with that, and then you've got to get that into the edit suite. You've got to make sure that the data on there is safe, and then you've got to back things up, and you've got to put that somewhere else, and then you've got to go through several processes of getting that where you want it and what platform you want it on and everything else. So that hasn't changed really. I mean, it's refined, but it hasn't changed basically since Media 100, and arguably since tape in some ways. It's just we've managed to cut out a few of the steps. Like, thank God that we don't have to lug around a box of digibeta tapes anymore. But the same principle applies. It was data, and we had to copy the data and put it somewhere else, and then bring it into the edit suite. So
one thing I heard the other day from a member of our team, which I didn't know about, was the move towards memory cards was actually expedited because of a earthquake in Japan that knocked out the facility that made the digibeta and DV cam tapes, and that put a big sort of they were quite scarce for a while, and that actually led to a faster uptake of memory cards. But I do actually remember that move was it was one of those things that was slowly creeping in, and no one believed it, and then almost overnight, it just instantly every camera went digital, or as in went to memory sticks. And obviously that cut out that digitizing process where you had to worry about drop frames, and obviously it was always a real-time process. You had to, however long you've shot for, you now had to sit there and digitize, and we've moved to memory cards. But what's interesting is that there afterwards the process has pretty much remained the same. You remain on one machine, whichever machine the project starts with, that's sort of where the project will end. And one of the things that, as you know, from the beginning of Elevate, that we've been absolutely obsessed with is removing that coupling of the physical location of the data and the software that's used, and putting it into obviously the cloud, and therefore making it available to other people. So I think it's fair to say, when we first talked about Elevate with you, you were, like a lot of people and all the pros we spoke to, were a little bit confused as to how that would actually work, the whole multiplayer thing. And what's your experience now, having used it at all of the focus groups?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's been very interesting and eye-opening to see, actually, because it's a process that we've kind of been used to in other areas of our digital life, and something like, Google Docs could be a decent example, or also in the graphic design world, going across to things like Figma. I think one of the reasons is why at first you think, why should that happen, or how can it happen, or why would I do it? It's because there's this huge weight of legacy that we have from everything else that's gone before. And one of the big things about that is just the quantity of stuff that we have to deal with. Like, the amount of data that you have to deal with is huge. It's the size of a medium-sized organization. I mean, it's crazy. And then having to shift that around, and there's still this, I think, a perception of like, well, that's difficult to shift all this stuff around. And even now we get people going, oh, can I send a drive over to get the footage? No, I'm going to upload it. It's fine. So there's perception of this stuff is bulky and cumbersome and everything else. So there's this kind of legacy hanging on around all that, and then to kind of conceptualize that in a sense that all that can be in the cloud, or all that can work remotely, is a kind of a little bit of a leap from that. In the same way that, let's say, having hundreds of thousands of documents at your company, now suddenly everything is we don't need the paper anymore. So, but with paper, it seems to be more manageable in your brain, because a sheet of paper is not like a terabyte of data. So there was that, and I have that as well, because having been through 20 odd years of dealing with this stuff, it's just ingrained in you about, how do I deal with terabytes of data? How do I deal with all this stuff going on, all these processes, and speed of time, and bandwidth, and all these things. So that, I think, is a big leap to get over that for people who are looking at this kind of thing.
Definitely, because one of the things that we've done with Elevate is we haven't just tried to replace the nonlinear video editing solution. So that would be a bit like sort of EVs from another parallel technology. The worst thing that could happen is just to replace the petrol engine with an electric motor and say that's it. That's not the way it's gone. Obviously, because of the move to EVs, lots of other things have arrived. Connectivity within cars, safety features, and obviously moving out to autonomous. And I think it's the same for us. We had the choice of just building a video editor that sits in a browser, and that's one route to go. But then you miss all of the opportunities around that. So really, when we've been building out Elevate, we've been looking at it more from the perspective of, well, how do you use this tool to create something? And then how do you manage all of the assets that were used in that, and obviously save them, make them easy to find for other productions later? But also something that we're going to be working on later, which is actually to tackle the distribution. Because whilst, as we said earlier, the distribution has changed significantly, we've got YouTube, Vimeo, Insta, TikTok, etc., there is still a missing gap of people wanting to, say, in the middle of their production, be able to very quickly share something. Now, obviously, there are video view and approval tools that are out there, but it still requires you to export the video, upload it to somewhere else, have that static workflow. Whereas here, the idea is you can just invite someone in, even if they don't have the permissions to change anything, they at least have the permissions to interact, or the ability to interact with the edit, comment on things or highlight things or talk you through it simultaneously together on a call. That's sort of really, really powerful. And we think that that will really help. But then again, looking to the future, people who want to just be able to embed videos on their website or within their intranet, there's a huge market there for us. And we see it elevate more as a platform than we see it as just a pure video editing tool. And that's definitely the way we're going to go for it. But yeah.
Well, I think one of the important points from that is the fact that, there's this refinement of how certain things have been done. And we're still in a situation where we're bolting lots of different apps together and trying to interface them in some way. And, video review platforms are great. And in some way they have revolutionized another little bit of the process, but it's still like a little bolt on. You've still got to do a process to get stuff in there, or you've still got to go through something else. And it's things like, even I still get emails about, feedback, even though there's ability to feedback. So it's like, there's all these kind of like different bits that are kind of being bolted together, and that's always been the case. And it's only when you have a change of process that changes. So we can say, again, the story going right back to tape, it's just been, a lot of it has been about just the refinement of that, cutting out a few steps here and there, making the leap from one bit to the next easier or quicker, but not fundamentally change the process. Maybe from tape to getting just digital media was one of those steps, but then everything else around it kind of stayed the same, in the sense that you just had to refine that process and make it easier. So, and now what the situation is, I use loads of platforms. I pretty much use everything, because there's different things that you need for different jobs, and there's different bits of something that you want to use from one place and another bit. And, that's just the nature of all these different platforms. But it's still a case of like trying to bolt them together, finding a way of swapping between it, and those kind of things. And that's pretty frustrating, actually. So
yeah, how do you find working with other people? Because obviously clients have got some of the footage, they've got logos, they've got other bits of material, and then there's a freelancer who's doing something, or a photographer. How do you find that, and what tools do you use, and what processes do you use to work with all the other people who are involved in a production?
Yeah, I think the most common question I get is, how can I send you this to you? Which shouldn't be a question anymore, should it? It is crazy. How can I send you a logo to you? Well, upload it, but where to? And so, and even with review platforms, and even with, all the various kind of like storage online stuff that you have, there's that question still comes up. But the thing is, with collaboration in the business, because first of all, the business has so many bits to it, and so many different people who might be working on it, and so many different skills, then that has its own combination of stuff, and all the time. So there is this constant sort of like, well, how can I work on stuff? And I think collaboration is actually probably not as widely kind of done in a proper collaborative way as it probably should be, because of the way that interfacing works. Now, the easiest way of collaborating, of course, is having 4 people in the same room talking, and in some ways, I was going to say that's what we used to do before everyone started working. I had freelancers work for me from Portugal and from the US, and things. So that doesn't happen as much anymore. But that's, I guess, the original collaboration is sitting down talking. But having the next level of that, where you're collaborating actually in that same way on product, it's a tricky thing, and it hasn't really happened in a way. So therefore people don't do it, I think. So it's like, if I had this conversation with a couple of people about editing and collaborative editing, and they go, well, why would you do that? Because you don't need to. Well, it's not the case you don't need to. It's the case you don't know what it's like when you do it, right? And after experiencing that with when testing out Elevate, that was one of the things immediately was like, oh, actually, it's a really fruitful process. Even though in that circumstance, the other editor I was working with was sitting next to me, which was great because we could also talk about it, but we could also work on the same timeline. And so what it was, it's like, I mean, I think it's a little bit eye-opening because it's like you don't sometimes it's one of those things you don't necessarily know you need until you've done it. And then it becomes something that, oh, that's a great way of dealing with X, Y, and Z. And of course, you're not always going to need to be collaborating with people, 100 people at the same time. But there are circumstances in projects where suddenly you need to all come together about something. And there's other circumstances where you'll be off again and doing a bit, and then you come together with somebody else. And but there isn't doing that is a tricky thing. So I think that was one of my biggest takeaways. Actually, was actually that you don't collaborate in that way because there isn't something that does it properly, and therefore it's not something that's on your radar to do immediately.
Definitely.
Whereas in actual fact, it would be super useful to have in specific circumstances and across pretty much any project really, and at different levels, because if you're working with someone who's doing sound, you're working with someone who's graphics, or you're working with an external producer, or or the client and everything else, then there's a slightly different set of different needs what that collaboration looks like. But all of those are areas of collaboration.
What we noticed, if you remember from the early focus groups, so this was sort of before the product was even started, before it had a name. Certainly it wasn't called Elevate then. And if you remember the group that you were in with the pro editors, there was a lady who works in feature films, and she'd always said that she didn't like the idea of collaboration. She thought it was a bad idea. The exact phrase was, I wouldn't do that if my name is the one on the credit roll. And then when asked how they coordinate all the shot list for the project, it was, we use Google Docs so everyone can collaborate and see it. And then if you remember at the when we sort of progressed it and we had the early beta releases of the product, she was probably the one who was smiling the most when she was using it and got really into it. And it is one of those things that you don't know what it's like until you try it. And no one asked for Google Sheets. Everyone thought that the whole world of Excel or spreadsheets and word processing was already done and dusted, and it was the end of it all. But once you've done it, you just literally have to do it once. It's like using Uber. Once you've ordered an Uber, once that's it. You're like, okay, I understand how this works. Or, once you've used internet streaming, Netflix, you're like, the prospect of it is always worse. Once you're through it, it makes a lot of sense. And I think for people who are joining the industry, and not necessarily the industry as a video editor, but people who are going to the workplace and maybe they work in marketing within an organization and they're going to be responsible for video, which now has gone from just being the advert for the company or the once a year promotional video or an internal HR video. It's now sort of something that brands are using all the time. I mean, plenty of brands produce more than 24 hours of content a day. And people who are coming into that, they don't have that legacy sort of how things were in the past or how things were done or how the video industry has ever operated. And to them, it's just like, well, if I've got my tool that does spreadsheets, I've got the tool that does word processing, I've got the publishing to the websites, and I've got the tools that I use for collaborative design, surely there just must be the next thing, which, what is the tool that I use for video? And that would make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I agree. And you have, there's lots of circumstances, like just going back to the fact that, the quantity of material. I mean, for example, some recent projects I've been doing in the States where we do some sort of main videos, and then they're like, oh, actually, the ad agency has asked for a 60-second version, a 30-second version. And then, oh, can we have that across other social formats? So then we have it in portrait and square, and then can we have that for all the other versions? So then you've gone from what was probably could have been traditionally one video. We've now got 24 different edits, and it's not like they're just cropped edits of the first one. They're separate edits. They're new pieces of media, and that's just for one video. So you've got 24 different outputs from that. Which and then I mean the same situation with with Expedia, for example. They go, oh, can we have this in 12 languages? And then, oh, can we have each one of those in all the formats? And it's exponential. So, and that's something that is really common, and it's going to just get more and more. There's more platforms come along and have slightly different requirements, whatever. But at the same time, that kind of thing, I can see the way that can work, in the sense that it's not necessarily something that becomes a bottleneck, say, for example, in one place either. So, being able to then work with people on some of those edits or whatever, just to, just reversion and things like that. That already, is one of those cases where, because of this explosion of demand, it produces a whole different set of kind of requirements for people doing it as well. So I think that's really interesting, actually.
Yeah, it's it's going to be different for different people in different roles, because there's obviously going to be the YouTubers and how they're going to be able to help them produce content. And what we're beginning to find is a lot of the sort of the middle tier of YouTubers, not even at the high end. At the high end, they have teams of editors, but even in the middle tier, people are beginning to use third parties to do things like the logging or do the rough cut. And so all of a sudden, when you have a tool that enables you to shoot your footage, upload it, and be able to share that project with somebody else in another country, have them go through and tidy everything up, get rid of all of the junk, and put that all together, that will really help, especially as we're going to be adding a lot of tools that help you in that process. So things like transcription tools, scene and object detection, and enriching the video, as we've sort of called it, going forward. There is actually an extract that we did get from the focus group that we ran, which was of one of the students who was using the product. And I think I just want to play that in, because I think she says it quite clearly. And this is a good example of someone who's only come to video editing in the last year or so.
Really good for educational purposes, for schools, for group projects and things, and for people to look at each other's work and be able to tell you exactly what's going on. I'm seeing a lot of really fun ways to kind of work at the same time and delegate jobs and actually do things a lot faster as well.
So even just that little extract gives you an idea of how people in all different stages of video production will be using the product to do things. Hugh, just coming back to you quickly, you've obviously been around the cloud editing industry for a long time. Have you seen a change in the way that people expect, or the expectations of users from tools like ours?
Definitely, and I think it goes right from the point zero, which is, the traditional model would be when you want to make a piece of content, you go and purchase a bit of kit, or you buy a license, bit of software, and you physically install something next to you and install a piece of software on your local machine. These days there is, as Jake says, there's a service for everything. So the more you can tie in and bolt things together into a cohesive workflow without having to go and purchase a bit of physical equipment or a license for a bit of software that's to be frank, a pain to deploy and not very flexible, and you move machine and you've got the same headache again. So yeah, I think the over the last 3 or 4 years, we've definitely seen a massive uptick in the number of people who just don't want the hassle of having to worry about the physical nature of media. And again, as Jake said, moving content around, video is unfortunately very cumbersome. That's probably a polite way to say it. It's often large files. When you're dealing with raw stuff off the back of a camera, it can be incredibly large. But the idea of that resistance to move workflow just because it's cumbersome, if you can do more and more in a platform with the right plugins and integrations to generators, to effects, to distribution platforms, then you're cutting out a lot of that headache, which I think that really feels like a resistance point, even for us who understand a lot of the tech behind it. It's a headache, and removing those headaches I think is going to be another big shift in the evolution of the video industry.
Definitely. And just again, for everyone to sort of be reminded of that, there's a reason why it's taken a bit longer in video than it has obviously with things like Google Sheets and other collaborative, even messaging, let's call it the early forms of collaboration with the real-time messaging tools. Video is just incredibly large. So a couple of seconds of uncompressed 8K footage is the entire works of Shakespeare, in data terms. So the challenge is obviously a lot harder. We're obviously very fortunate. We have a proxy which works really fantastically online and obviously references that original source footage behind the scenes. But you touched on something else, which is obviously going to be very important to us, is the perception that of cloud editors that they're going to be a lot weaker than traditional editors or traditional video composition tools. And we've always said from day one, we're not going to compete with the high-end composition tools from, Autodesk Flame and things like that. We're certainly not going to go, head on into the 3D world and go against Maya or any of these applications. We are definitely focusing at the video editor for everybody. And with that, we know that there are plenty of other companies that are producing great tools, AI tools. We're seeing generative AI obviously becoming very popular at the moment, and even things like processing tools to help transcribe things or object detection. So one of the things that we have built into Elevate is a framework which allows generators, and generators are things like text and shapes, and we've got some great progress going on there at the moment in terms of how you actually can create assets directly within the product, and they'll be available to third parties down the line. So people will be able to create generators that obviously can do things that we haven't dreamt up, or things that aren't necessarily relevant to us. It could be other products that we bridge together. So we're going to be building connectors so that people can connect. If they've already got their footage sat in a Dropbox account, we'll be able to peer into that, or Google Drive, or things like that. And of course, on the export end, we know that for the majority of cases people will want a file delivered to them, but the ability to publish directly to YouTube or Insta, and of course to our forthcoming distribution efforts ourselves, will be something that we build into that whole ecosystem of plugins and connectors. And we do believe that as we don't have the monopoly on ideas, we will expect that other people will be able to connect their products and services into ours, which eventually does make it truly a platform, which will obviously help with it being of use, more use from beginning to end of the production process.
Yeah, that's it's a very important thing. I mean, the whole idea of platforms is platforms itself has probably revolutionized digital life anyway across most areas. So to have platforms which are open and be able to bolt stuff into is going to be very important. Absolutely. Good to hear.
I think it's also, you think of the complexity of some of the things that might be involved in a production workflow. If somebody wanted to add a particular effect to their content, and let's assume they have gone through that cumbersome process of buying a bit of kit or buying a license for a bit of software, trying to get, some third-party effects package working on your machine, if you're in a marketing department of an organization, is probably going to be a little bit of a headache. It's often a headache for, I'm sure Jake would attest to this, plugin installation and licensing and all of the nastiness that can exist around that. Being able to just, use that with a third party baked in, that's got to be easier, right?
I mean, one of the things actually is funny that one of the things that sometimes stops us using certain products is because if it's going to go to somebody else, then they also have to have it, and it actually just restricts which products you're going to use. So we end up not using some products for that reason, which is crazy, really.
That was actually something that you were concerned about at the beginning, that would you still, with a product like Elevate, have access to some of the effects that you do use, or some of the techniques that do exist in other nonlinear editors? And obviously we're building those out as we go. And one of the things that you did ask me right at the beginning is what sort of level of effects, because the perception, of course, is that the online video editing would really just be about trimming, or at best assembly. And as you know, we've been working hard. Hugh mentioned integrating things like LUTs. We've obviously done a lot of color correction, and something that you did ask about, which I'm pleased to show you today, and it's a bit of a sneak preview for the people that we have watching and our users. We are just working on our transitions, which is obviously a core part of video editing. So you did laugh and say, will we implement star wipes? Well, I've just dragged one on, and as you can see from here, I'm able to put in a star wipe into the product. And we're going to be building out a lot more of those effects. We've got some great work going on in color correction as well with a 3-way color corrector, which we're building out. And of course, we're very, very keen that Elevate is a stable platform. So we're definitely taking our time to get this right in the early days, because so much of everything we build is getting the infrastructure correct and ready for it to scale, so that we don't just have a handful of transitions that are the stock, ones that people are used to, but also so that we can have third parties build really elaborate and interesting ones. And the same for generators. We're taking our time to get things like our text generator, which is heavily being worked on at the moment, right, because it's going to allow us to build lots of other generators for the future, which is really, really key. I'm conscious of time, and I know that we've already got some questions lined up. So if it's okay with you guys, I'm gonna move to some of the questions that are coming in off the podcast. Are there any third-party services that you've identified as priorities? Definitely. One of the very first ones that we are, or the ones that we're working with at the moment, are the companies that are providing enriching services to the video. So that's transcription, object detection, scene detection. We already have our product, obviously, in the M&E space, is used a lot for logging. And we do believe that it's kind of one of those things of junk in, junk out, or the more effort you put in up front, the better your edit will be. So we're putting in a lot of effort in the early days and working with organizations that will help enrich the video so that your editing process is much easier, therefore, going forward. Does Jake envisage using AI at scale? And if so, which one? Yeah, what's your view on AI, Jake?
Okay, interesting. AI is, of course, rather popular these days. So AI in the video world has been around for a bit in various forms, and we've all been using it, really. I mean, like, the biggest one is actually doing things like translations and transcriptions. It's become so easy to do things like subtitles and that sort of thing. It's at a press of a button, you literally got the thing translated, transcribed, and then translated if you need to, and then put into subtitles, and that has just got so much better. But I think that the AI goes across lots of different things, and there's things like AI for managing media in the first place. So where we've seen a few kind of baby steps towards that, things like face recognition, so you can lump all the shots that look the same as the same person, things like that. I mean, it's useful. It's not, it's those things will improve, and there's so many more things that can be pulled out, so much more data that can be extracted from picture, which will be of use. So things across scene detection, object detection. So there's that whole chunk, and I think that's going to be a big thing, actually. Although it's not the kind of poster boy of AI, I don't think. It's like the big one is, of course, recreating video, but I see that as being, that's of course also the most controversial, in the sense that how that happens and how it works, and is it really going to be well, it will eventually be amazing, I'm sure, but that's the one that actually is probably the least sort of useful at the moment. It's all the productivity side of things. So, and there's no one specific AI that does any of this stuff yet. So it's a little bit here, a little bit there, and they're all congealing into this AI sort of blob around video, and that's great. So, and I think it will continue that way. I mean, audio, I think, is probably the next biggest thing to come along, and there's audio tools at the moment, but of course there's ethical issues. I mean, the number of times, again, I get asked the question of, can we just replace that word? I'd love to replace the word, but we've also got to check with the person who said it that they're okay with them doing it. But those little things, and so I was doing this edit the other day, and I was trying to get a different version of the person saying "the," because they stumbled. And an AI could presumably do that in a millisecond or so, but it took me another half hour. So that's such a small little tweak, but that took half an hour. And so it's the refinement of things like that, and the more of those things that can be plugged in to a piece of software, the better. At the moment, I have to sometimes go out of one piece of software into another to do a bit of work, especially when it comes to transcribing and subtitles, because some packages are a lot better than others on those things. But that's purely to use the AI, right? And then on other occasions, you come back and do something else. And then I think also there's bits of AI which you don't even know are going on. and have been around for a while anyway, but are sort of gradually improving. I mean, for example, Apple have got like, kind of color matching sort of stuff going on in the background, which is I think probably primitive-ish these days, but all that stuff is coming on. So to answer the question, there is no one AI that I use, and there's not going to be a single AI that I use, but there's going to be specialization in every single element of video editing. And that's just going to become more and more improved. And I think the skill to this is actually how those get pulled in together and how you use them. And then ultimately is how, how those AIs maybe get superseded by a kind of an overall AI. I mean, I can see the way that it could go, for example. Another extremely useful thing, which I'm sure will come along, is having what happens in large language models at the moment, where you can put in a document, go summarize this for me, is that you have an interview, you have an hour-long interview, you say, can you please make me a decent cut out of this for 1 minute? And then that's going to save hours of time. I think it then becomes the question of, okay, well, how much do I want that to happen? But that's not the point. The point is, it's possible, and it will, in a lot of cases, be a great tool. But it's having the ability to plug into something like that, rather than going, right, well, this bit of software has it baked in, but this piece of software doesn't, and so on, so on and forth.
That's actually something that we've pioneered a prototype that takes a video, transcribes it, and goes and finds the most interesting paragraph in there. And it's quite alarming. We actually ran it on one of the Churchill speeches from the movie Darkest Hour, and it was brilliant. It found the exact quotes that you would expect to be the highlighted quotes. So that's definitely going to be a thing. And for us, obviously, from a company perspective, we're going to be integrating with any of the relevant AI vendors, and whether we'll produce the plugin to start with or whether they will, and it will be available for our marketplace. We don't want to be part of that fight. There's plenty of people who are producing all these great little niche tools. We just want to be that platform that helps glue it all together.
Yeah, I think that's important, because there's so many little bits that people are working on, and that's going to coalesce. But it's like you're not necessarily going to get that on one bit of software anytime soon. So, absolutely, having the open-ended approach, which is no different to how other bits of software work, is super important. I mean, we could talk all day about AI. So.
It is a long conversation. Actually. Yeah. Okay, so moving on to the questions, we've got one here. So please give us some examples of the possible new opportunities that might emerge from Elevate being a cloud resident platform. So this is the whole point, I think, behind why we're building this product. At the moment, the video editing industry has expanded 1,000 times, certainly since I've been in the game. However, it's still absolutely at the beginning. It still requires people to have some level of skill or enthusiasm to go and learn the tools and get behind the tools. We have to make this absolutely, democratized and available to everybody. So the opportunities that will arise, we don't even know. Who would have believed that social media would have been a thing 20 years ago, and there'd be an employee within the company who was sitting there getting quotes or getting ideas from people or taking photos of products and just publishing them to an online platform? That wouldn't have been something that anyone could have imagined. And so we don't know where all of the use cases are going to come from. But the one thing that we can be sure of is that the format of video is absolutely the number one way to convey information. So we're going to expect to see a massive expansion in the way that video is used. I've got one here, which is to do with, so how secure is my content? This is really important for my clients. What protections are in place for this? Now, Hugh, I know this is actually something that you're a lot more knowledgeable about because of the work that we already do in this space. So do you want to tell us a little bit about the reliability of the cloud storage and how that works?
Yeah, of course. So I guess there's a few important pieces from a technology and development perspective. We're tying in with secure external authorization services. So, we're not building our own authorization identity. We're not holding personal data on storage or anything that we manage. And when you're uploading media, it's going into secure cloud storage, which is high availability, resilient. I think they quote 7 nines of data resilience without doing any additional backups. So, it's not really something that as a user you have to worry about, concerns around data leakages or anything like that. Obviously, the other aspect is around projects and permitting people to get into your footage or your project. One of the key things of multiplayer is that you do need to invite someone to your project. Obviously, you have the ability within the Teams model to revoke that access. So it's not that you're immediately opening up, very much like Google Docs. You're allowing a certain level of permission to that footage or to that project, rather than opening it up to the world. So yeah, there's security both at a identity perspective, a storage perspective, and at an application perspective. And security is very close to our heart on the Blackbird product. We do a lot of stringent controls and on that platform, and also we do regular intrusion detection on Elevate and Blackbird as platforms to make sure that they're best in class in that respect.
Sure. So we've got limited time, so I just want to get to one last double question from one of our users, which is Elevate.io has clearly had some top-notch IP integrated due to the success of Blackbird in the M&E space. When do you think that the content creation industry will begin to utilize this platform, or are you still developing Elevate a particular level before the beast is released to the wider market? If already released, how much interest has the traction has there been? And the follow-up question is, when will we see LUTs available in the platform? So I think it's really important that everybody understands. So in terms of the interest that we've received, this is by far the first, let's say, highly innovative product that I haven't had to explain the reason behind why we're doing it to most of the people who we show it to, or the people who are inbound to us. Certainly having pioneered a company in the streaming space, I do remember some time ago having to try and educate everyone as to why this is a good idea. We don't have that problem at all. Everybody who sees the product, once they've heard about it, they kind of get the point behind it. Once they've seen it, they absolutely understand it. So that doesn't mean that we haven't become an overnight success. There is no product in our space, especially in the online space, that's just had an immediate jump up. There is time it takes to embed these things in, and often you find that users will use them for one particular project to start with, and then it will slowly just get bigger and bigger and bigger, and you see that quite commonly. For us, it's so important that we build the platform right and we build all the infrastructure in place, because if we rush out of the door and we just throw something out there that does enough to get interest and enough to gain some users, but we don't build it for something that's scalable, all we'll end up with is the users who sign up, and it will be capped. For us, we're going for a general purpose platform. We're going to build something that is very, very useful across the whole industry. Otherwise, we end up building something that's only useful to a very small niche, and you're then only as good as the day that someone comes along and does that bit better than you, potentially. So for us, we're doing it right. We are staggering the rollout of this product. Of course, we all wish it was already in the hands of thousands and thousands of users, but every day we get new people signing up to use the early release, and we are continuing to make sure. And I'm the product owner of this. I am being very particular about when we're going to release the things, when we know that they're right and we know that they're in a position that will allow us to scale on top of them. So I hope that answers that question. Does Elevate assert any rights over uploaded or processed content? Absolutely not. We will not go down that route of now, just to be clear, if a plugin provider that we're working with or that's available for our market space, we obviously have no control over if the content is delivered to them to be processed and to be brought back. We have no control over that. That's just the nature of obviously any other. We cannot be personally responsible for any other plugin that is built for our product and used within our product. However, for us as a company, we absolutely do not look at your footage. We do not access your footage, and we do not use your footage for any learning, and we will not do that. That's clearly for us a line, and the nature of the companies that we work in, or where our history is from in the media and entertainment space, it's just not even an option that we could even think that we would have any rights over other people's work. So we definitely wouldn't do that. And looking at the time, just one very, very last question was to do with what is the balance that Elevate will strike between control and file output and ease of use? So as mentioned before, the product is so important for us that we make an easy to use product, that we make a product that's available to all. And so we will do our best. It's a bit like, if you're in the large, let's say heavy duty vehicles industry, we're not building JCBs, we're building transit vans, we're building vans. So vans are just much, much more widely useful to a much, much wider group of people. And they don't require anything like the training, and they're so easy for you to get in. And anyone who's ever driven a van is always amazed at how easy it actually is compared to, as long as you can drive a car. But a JCB or a digger is something completely different, and that requires specialist training, and it's a specialist tool. We're in the van business. We're going to make sure that everything we build is super smooth, super easy to use, and appeals to the widest possible market. And if it is something that sits slightly out of that, it'll either be a plugin that can help you, or it will be that it's another tool that can do the work, and then the output from that tool, so somebody who's doing visual effects in Flame, that could be then uploaded and put into Elevate, and we can go from there. So unfortunately, that is all the time that we have for us today. Thank you to my two guests, Hugh and Jake, and thank you for everybody watching. We hope you found this very informative. As you mentioned in the last podcast, this is a new thing for us. This is only our second one. We're going to do our best to keep them up to date and do more of them and learn from them. And there will be a follow-up email that goes around in the next few days or after this event. And it will include a survey. And please do take the time to tell us what you like, what you want to hear more of, and what we can be doing better as an organization. We're constantly building out, who Elevate is, not just from a product point of view, but also from a brand and how we communicate and interact with our users. So please take the time to do that. And thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you on the next show.
Not having the hard drive backup, just all of that disappears.
You can take it anywhere and work with anyone.
It actually, every now and again, I forget that we were literally online.
You just send them the link, or perhaps already be on it, and just say, okay, check this out.
It's really quite exciting.